This is not the United States of America. This is not a country where people left behind their histories and started again. This is the continent of Europe, and it's a continent that we should be rather proud of, because it's a continent that has within it the most diverse languages and cultures of any time zone in the world. The beauty of Europe are the differences that exist within it. And the idea that we can have one policy, a one-size-fits-all policy that is going to work, is something that I think already has proved to be a failure. In fact, we're heading towards, with this unitary government and with this one-size-fits-all planning, we really are heading back to a form of government that we could recognise in the old Soviet Union. Indeed, many of the commissioners, of course, were apparatchiks within that system. People like Sim Kallas from Estonia, who for 20 years was a member of the Russian Communist Party. Oh, but being career politicians, they've adjusted beautifully to this new form of government based in Brussels. They don't like it, by the way, when I say that. In fact, they get very upset in the European Parliament and often start shouting at me, but honestly, it doesn't bother me. Every time we've seen a common European policy, centrally planned, run from the centre, and beyond the democratic fingertips of the peoples of Europe, we have seen failure. We've seen it, of course, with the common fisheries policy. Something that is not just an economic disaster, but one of the greatest ecological disasters in the world, where fishermen all across Europe are now forced to throw back dead into our seas hundreds of thousands of tonnes of fish every single year. And it's interesting to note, isn't it, that Norway, who incredibly sensibly, in my opinion, you might not agree, but incredibly sensibly have said no to joining the European Club, have a healthy, thriving, booming fishing industry, much better sustainability in their seas, and a policy that forbids them from throwing back any fish dead. But that was the first common policy that we in Britain saw. But of course, the next really big common policy was the one that emerged during the 1990s, and I'm talking, of course, about the creation of the euro. Now, all I can say is thank goodness that in the United Kingdom, despite the fact that a majority of our politicians wanted to sign us up to the euro, there was a big campaign in Britain, led very much by businesses and trading companies, and we managed to escape the clutches of the euro. There were also just two countries in Europe, your relatively near neighbours of Denmark and Sweden. They were the only two countries that had a referendum specifically on joining the euro, and of course both of them said no. You weren't given the choice, were you? You weren't given a free and fair referendum in Finland as to whether you should give up your currency and join an economic and monetary union. You were forced into it by your career politicians. Now, right from the start, going back in fact as early as 1990, it was the issue of the creation of the euro that got me involved in politics. I wasn't in politics before. I never intended to be in politics. I worked in the City of London, I worked in commodities, in finance and in trade. But I thought from the start that a one-size-fits-all interest rate across the diverse economies of Europe could never, ever work. That what was happening here was we were setting up a single currency as a means of leading on to a full political union. And there were economists, certainly in Germany and certainly in the Netherlands, who from the start said that countries like Greece should never, ever have joined. But because of the greed and stupidity of their own politicians, because the people in those countries, like you, were not given the choice, all these countries were forced together at the early part of this decade into this new economic and monetary union. And for the peripheral players on the fringe, for the Irelands, the Portugals, even the Spains, what joining the euro meant was that interest rates were about half the level they should have been for the first 7 or 8 years of the euro. And what it led to is the most ludicrous consumer boom, the most ridiculous property boom, an excess of cheap credit. And now, when it's turned the other way, we find those countries stuck in the most desperate, and I'm going to argue tonight, dangerous position. You know, if this meeting was taking place in Greece, and if we talked about the fact that now the Greeks have no control, not just over their own interest rates, but they have no control over their own budget, because their budget is now set by the Herman Van Rompuys of this world, another great close personal friend of mine, if any of you watch YouTube may know. You've reached a position in Greece where it is now obvious to people that it is completely irrelevant how you vote in domestic Greek elections. It doesn't matter whether you have a conservative government in Greece or a socialist government in Greece, because they have no power over the Greek economy. They are not the masters of their own destiny anymore. And that is dangerous because democracy acts wonderfully as a safety valve. You may not like the government that's in office, but what you do is you resolve that at the next election you'll help another party with a different manifesto. It's the essence of democracy. It isn't just about who you put in government, it's about you having the power to sack them and to replace them with somebody else. That in Greece has gone. So if voting doesn't change anything, then all you're left with is civil disobedience or civil disorder. And I think we are seeing in Greece the early stages of something that, unless they bust out of the euro, I think could become really, really serious civil insurgency that could perhaps lead on to something even worse than that. That is just, ladies and gentlemen, how dangerous, how mad, how crazy this European project is. What it is doing right across Europe, it is robbing nation states of their identity. It is robbing nation states of their ability to be the masters of their own destiny. And those countries are in terrible trouble. Your position, of course, by comparison, is rather better. Now, all you've got to do is to pay the bill. So I'm sure you're all very happy with that. You've got to pay the bill. The Germans will go on having to pay the bill. And I would have thought that at some point, sense must prevail, and we must realise that we simply can't have countries like Finland and countries like Greece together in the same monetary union. You know, these bailouts have woken everybody up. And the reality is that whether you're the payers or the payees, you are now all trapped in something. You're trapped inside something which is effectively an economic prison. In the days of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they used to call it the Volkerkerker, a prison of nations. And that literally is what people are now stuck in inside this euro. Now, there's only one good thing about all of this, and that is that public opinion across the EU has woken up. And if you look at the European Commission's own barometer poll, which comes out once every 6 months, we now see that less than 50% of people across the entire Union think that the Union is a good idea. And I put it to you that that is why parties like UKIP in the United Kingdom, that is why parties like the True Finns here are beginning to do extraordinarily well. Because our career, professional, political classes have let us down very badly indeed. They've betrayed our democracy. They've betrayed our nations. They've signed us up to something which is expensive. They've signed us up to something which, frankly, isn't far short of being outright fraudulent. And isn't it delightful that the Court of Auditors of the European Union haven't even signed off their own accounts for the last 16 years in a row, and yet still we're supposed to pour in money. No, I'm optimistic, because I feel that we've reached a moment where over the course of the next few years, these movements like Timo's, movements like mine, are going to become so big and strong that the political elite will not be able to ignore them. And the only way they'll be able to buy us off, the only way they'll be able to attempt to try and neuter these movements, is to make sure that we do have free and fair referendums so that we can decide our own futures. I hope we get a democratic solution to all of this, because if we don't get a democratic solution to it, then the kind of thing that is happening in Greece, we're in danger of seeing almost everywhere else. I want to live in a Europe where we trade together, we cooperate together, we're free together, I don't want to live in a Europe of Barroso, Van Rompuy and the European Commission, and I know that a growing number of you feel the same way. I'm delighted to be here for a couple of days. I wish the True Finns every success in your forthcoming elections. I hope you here too can make real history. Thank you.